Hey, what's up? It's Bon. Let's talk about Mass Effect. And specifically, let's talk about the choices from the Mass Effect trilogy that could be made canon and whether I think they should or shouldn't. First, if you like Mass Effect or you just like video games in general, please consider subscribing to this channel, like this video, and comment down below with your thoughts, questions, or just to say hi. I have a podcast on here. I make lots of video game videos. I plan on covering a lot of stuff, but especially Mass Effect, the Division news as it comes out, and really anything that I find interesting. What I find interesting today is talking about the Mass Effect choices in the trilogy and which ones could be made canon and why I think they should or shouldn't be. So the list I have of possible choices are the romances that you pick, the Rachni Queen / the Rachni Fate in general, Rex's Fate, the Vermeer Survivor, Destiny Ascension / the Council. This is all Mass Effect 1. Conrad Werner, Mass Effect 2 Companions, the Genophage, the Geth and Quarian War, and the final Crucible choice. So starting with romances, this is the one that I think basically can't be canonized. If they did it, I think it's fairly obvious they would make it Liara for M Shep or F Shep. We know that Liara is in the next game. So I guess if they were really desperate to try to shrink down what they're doing to try to be able to expand again, which we'll talk more about at the end, they could do the romance, but I would argue that them canonizing a romance choice would be more controversial than if they canonize an ending. I think they'd both be controversial, but I think one would be way more so than the other. I think one, people have kind of accepted that it may happen, even if they don't want it to. And I think the romance choice, they will not accept. I think people would be very upset if that happened. And to a point, I get it. And the big thing for me with all of these choices and whether or not they can canonize them is how much easier does it make their life later? How much easier does it make it to develop the next game, to come up with a story that is logical and makes sense for the next game? So the romance, I mean, in theory, it also depends on how much later is this next game going to take place. Is it going to involve the same protagonist? Is it a new protagonist? Is it someone adjacent who's involved? Who's still alive? Who's dead? You know, all of those things are a big deal. But I wanted to start off with romance because it's the one I think that like they literally can't do. Maybe they will, and if they do, I think I know what they'll do. I think it would be Liara, because that's definitely who they push you towards throughout the entire series. But we'll have to wait and see. So the romance is a no-go for me, but we'll have to wait and see. The Rachni Queen and the Rachni in general is a really interesting one, because if you kill the Queen in Mass Effect 1, they still bring her back in 3, but as like a clone that is not well. But if you let her live, they bring her back in 3, but she's able to help. She's able to be helped and to end up helping against the Reapers. So the Rachni is an interesting one because it has similar implications as the Genophage choice, which I'll talk about in a minute, in that in theory, you could be unleashing a scourge on the galaxy that would be coming along. You know, say you beat the Reapers, but you save the Rachni, they could end up being a problem again. And so this one is interesting. I don't think they have to canonize this. I think this is one of the choices where they can adjust either way, because I think it may be fairly impactful on the next game and the balance of power and so on and so forth. But I don't think it would be impossible to account for. It could be as little as we see Rachni walking around on the Citadel and being kind of a part of day-to-day living in the post-Reaper War galaxy. It could be much bigger in that they do become warlike and aggressive again, and maybe even become like one of the antagonists in the next game, or maybe like an offshoot of the Rachni or something like that. But the Rachni is one I don't think they have to canonize. The next one I have is Rex's Fate. This is separate from the Gin of Age, but I'll get there. I think Rex's Fate is one that they don't have to canonize, but they probably should. I think that Reeve, I just don't feel like is a very strong character, and because I really do believe in the next game they are going to have to they're gonna have to narrow down the story enough to then re-expand it, because if they try to take the current game and expand it from where the game and the franchise is left at the end of Mass Effect 3, assuming this next game takes place after that, which it seems like it does, that would be really hard and messy, where I feel like if they contract where the story is and expand from there, they can get us into a good spot. And that will probably mean picking at least some canon choices. And one of the smaller ones they could fix or fix into place would be Rex. Now, maybe some people will disagree with me. Maybe some people loved Reeve. Maybe some of their best playthroughs involved killing Rex in the first game and doing whatever they did afterwards. I mean, those people will probably disagree with me. But I would find it hard to believe that a majority of players would be upset if they canonize that Rex lives and goes on to become what he becomes, which we'll talk about shortly. So this is the first one I'll say that I think they could not canonize it, but I think they should, and that Rex survives Mass Effect 1. The next one is the Vermeer Survivor choice. And so whether or not you pick Kaidan or Ashley, should they canonize one of those choices for the next game? Well, if you listen to the subreddit or people on social media and stuff, you would probably think that they would canonize that Ashley dies, because for various reasons, both fair or not, people really don't like Ashley. I personally find Kaidan kind of annoying, but that's just me. I'm not into his kind of deal. And for me, I would say this is one they shouldn't canonize. I think these characters are substantial characters in the series, but not to the point where it's kind of like the Rachni. If the next game takes place in a time frame where Kaidan and Ashley could still be alive, whoever is alive, you could hand wipe it, and maybe you would see them briefly during part of the next game, and now they're a general or something. They're some kind of high-ranking official after the events of the Reaper War, and I don't think that would be that crazy. They could involve them as much as they want, but the bare minimum to keep from having to pick a canon choice and which one of them survived is to just make the survivor's role relatively minor. Now this assumes that in Mass Effect 3 you don't kill the Vermeer survivor during the exchange with Udina. But that's just one that I'll just assume. If you saved the Vermeer survivor in 1, you saved them in 3. You can argue with me about that down in the comments if you want. So no canon choice for Vermeer survivor. The Destiny Ascension and whether you save the Council or not. I would say this is one that they should just lock in. I feel like Mass Effect 2 especially never did a very good job of like pounding in the idea of like the human council that supposedly gets put in. And then even Mass Effect 3, if you killed the original council, the replacement council is like kind of whatever. I feel like they're so wishy-washy and kind of lack any real impact that it would be interesting to see the original council, especially in the aftermath of the Reaper War. I would also say there's a pretty good chance that in the events of Mass Effect 3, I'd be surprised if the council survives anyways. So even if they did, whether they did or didn't canonize the Destiny Ascension / council choice at the end of Mass Effect 1, I would imagine they would write it off that the leaders, whoever was in place at the end of 3, just retired or died during the event, especially at the end of the game if they didn't get away. And I would say this is one that either way they go, canonizing or not, it's not really going to matter. Conrad Werner, this is kind of a joke one, especially for someone who's in the subreddit and the comments sometimes, who kind of makes jokes about hating Conrad all the time. Yeah, Conrad is an interesting one. During my last playthrough, for the first time, lost Conrad, and I don't actually know how. I don't think I finished his 3 visits in the first game, and so I think he just doesn't show up anymore, because he wasn't in Mass Effect 2 at Ilium, and I never saw him again. Conrad's one, he's such a meme and he's such a legend to the trilogy. You have to canonize Conrad living, and I would even like it if they canonized Conrad living. If you got all of the Asari writings in the first game, and he's like a super smart scientist engineer that ends up becoming some like big name in the Alliance for his shield tech or something. The Mass Effect 2 companions, I don't really want to go through each one of them because I think that would take forever. I feel like for the most part, their fates in Mass Effect 2 are wrapped up or handled pretty well in 3, whether they live or not. And so I don't think they need to canonize any of those. I think that they can either ignore it, because since if the next game is directly coming after 3, I guess they could in theory take on your choices, but at the end of the day, say they do take your choices and they have people live, and it's still in a time frame where we could see them alive, especially for the humans and Solarians especially. I think it would make sense to just maybe include them quickly, or we get an email from them or something. It's one of those ones where if you kill them off or you canonize certain people dying, you're just gonna make some people mad. So you might as well just not canonize any of it and vaguely involve any of the characters who we don't think are essential to the next game. The Genophage choice is a huge one, I think. I think that the impact of canonizing this, of not canonizing it, would be so big that they probably have to. I'm trying to imagine them developing a game where they show the impact of saving the Krogan or not, and it would probably be fairly drastic, or it wouldn't be different at all. Because if you do the ending where you don't cure the genophage, you trick the Krogan, but you let Mordin live, Mordin basically swears to cure it anyways, eventually. And so you end up with the same result long term, whether you cured or not. There is the one possibility of Mordin dying and betraying the Krogan, and they don't get cured at all. And so, if you want to take that 25% of the possible choice and go that way, I guess you could. But I would think, I think it would be more interesting for the Krogan to just be in the next game and be cured and see the consequences of that. We know the Solarians are upset about that. We know the Turians are upset about that choice. And I think it could be a really, really good, crucible for that, for something to pop off and become one of the antagonizing moments in the next game, where we beat the Reapers, hoorah, we did it, and then there pops into a civil war where the Krogans are fighting the Turians and the Solarians, and the Alliance is trying to make peace with everyone, but you start to realize that unrestricted Krogan are literally a danger to the entire galaxy, and then you start talking about the Rex choice. If they canonize Rex being in charge, maybe things work out better, but if Reeve is in charge, it's implied that things won't go very well. So I think that I think the genophage one, I would personally prefer if they just canonized that it was cured, because I think you end up there anyways. And I think that presents the most interesting choice for the next game. And I think it does that narrowing job just a little bit to save the developers and writers from having to account for it not being cured. Now, if they didn't canonize it, they could end up in a situation where the Krogan are wiped out either way. They could say, well, if you didn't cure it, then they're wiped out because of that. But if you did cure it, they could say that they're all wiped out because they all got healthy, bred hundreds and thousands of them, and then they fought to the death and ended up killing themselves anyways. So I don't know. I think it's an interesting thing. And I would like to see what the Krogans look like at full strength, even if it's bad for the galaxy. Another big one here is the Geth and Quarian war and how that works out. So the choices in the game are that you can pick one side or the other. But if you do some specific prerequisites, you are able to make peace between them. So if you make peace between them, the Geth allow the Quarians to return to their home planet. They even help them with their suits to become acclimated to their environment. So in a short term, they wouldn't have to wear their masks anymore, their headdresses. They wouldn't have to be in suits anymore. They could be in normal clothing or however they wish to walk around. But if you pick one or the other, then the other one gets defeated. Now, it's implied that if you pick the Quarians, all the Geth die. And it's implied that if you pick the Geth, the vast majority of Quarians die. Now, it is implied that there are Quarians like all over the galaxy on their pilgrimages and stuff like that. So in theory, the Quarians would probably still go on. The Geth probably wouldn't, especially if their server stacks were destroyed, because they don't really live in their bodies. They live in servers, and they just kind of remote in to go do stuff manually. The Geth and Quarian one, I think if they feel like this is where they want to try to narrow the story down again before they re-expand it, doing the peace makes the most sense. It would be interesting to see Rannoch like inhabited. It'd be cool if those two species didn't wipe each other out, but that depends a lot on the ending, which we'll talk about in a moment. So I don't know. I guess it's possible that the Quarians winning that war could be made canon, because it's already been suggested in Mass Effect Next media, especially the poster in 2021, that the Geth are dead, but that they are coming back, or that they will be a part of the next story one way or the other. So the Geth and Quarian one is interesting, and you will get some very hot takes if you dive into that on the subreddit or YouTube or other social media. Some people have very, very strong feelings about whether the Geth are saved or not. And then the final one, the big one, the one everyone talks about, the Crucible choice. So at the end of Mass Effect 3, you get to pick from one of 3 endings. Technically 4, you can shoot the kid or refuse, but that ending wipes out that cycle and starts anew 50,000 years later. I don't think they're going to go with that. But the whole idea of whether or not they should canonize an ending for the next game comes down to probably the biggest point where they could try to narrow down the story to then re-expand it again. My personal take is that I think they should pick Perfect Destroy as the ending. I think it wipes out the Reapers, it gets rid of that kind of tired antagonist, and it sets things up for rebuilding and for new antagonists. That's what I prefer. I understand people like the Synthesis ending and the Control endings. I think those could have a game element moving forward. I just feel like they are so different, and I feel like the game really is pushing you towards the Destroy ending. You know, people mostly pick the Destroy ending. I personally think it's the only good ending. I don't like the Synthesis or Control, even though I respect people who do. So this is the one that probably most controversially, I do think they should pick a canon ending. Because if you try to account for all 3 endings, especially the high and low EMS, as well as everything else that you may try to keep track of for the next game, you just put yourself in a weird bind of how big you can, go with the next story, how I mean, if you have to try to account for every single ending, both a good and a bad version of it, I mean, you're talking about, like, I think the game world, the difference between a control ending and a destroy ending, or destroy and synthesis, is so big that if you took all three choices into account, you would essentially have to make like basically three different stories. I really believe that the hero, Commander Shepard, taking over this race of, you know, massacring aliens, or the whole idea of, you know, everyone becoming half robot and half organic. I think those are fine endings for people who enjoy that. I just don't think those are very good endings to try to move forward with. I think the destroy ending is the obvious one to move forward with. But that also comes down to my own kind of bias. Now, one reason I may be a bit biased towards that is the choice of whether Shepard lives or not. That comes to a whole different conversation of whether or not we play a Shepard or not. I'm not going to get into that today, but Shepard's fate in general, because, you know, that's a huge deal for the next game. It seems like the, you know, few choices right now are, will, you know, Shepard come back as the protagonist? Will this game take place, you know, near or far after Mass Effect 3? Will we play as Shepard again, or will they like be a PMC, or will they just be dead, either because they got killed at the end of Mass Effect 3, or because they decide to make Shepard an NPC like Anderson or Hackett? I don't want that, because that wouldn't be our Shep anymore. That would just be a Shep, you know, Commander Shepard. And I've really come to the point for me where I either want to play as Shepard or Shepard to be gone. For me, I've gotten to a point where there's no in between. I don't want to send Shepard to Andromeda. I don't want to cryo freeze them or clone them or have a child with their DNA that we hope will act like them. I don't want any of that personally. I think that's just a bridge too far. And I think, you know, that would be a bad thing. So as for, you know, canonizing the Crucible, I understand people's reasons for not wanting that to happen. But I really think them picking one ending and going all in on it is more respectful to the community than picking multiple endings and kind of shadowing them down. There was conversation about people saying like, well, maybe they, you know, set the next game so far ahead of time that whatever choice you made doesn't matter. Well, in theory, you know, choosing a human to become the leader of the Reapers, we wouldn't know the impact of that for 50,000 years, right? And so, and then the issues with synthesis as well. So just personally, I really think that they should canonize Destroy for the Crucible choice. I understand why people disagree, and I'm sure someone will chime in with that on this video. But yeah, I think that they should canonize. I think that's the biggest step they can do to paring this game down before they blow it back out story-wise. That's what I have for this one. If you have your own thoughts, you know, let me know what you think would be okay to canonize or not, whether it's nothing or everything. Please let me know down in the comments. Thank you so much for watching the video. Please check out my video game podcast, the Echo Cast, on all podcast platforms, including iTunes, Spotify, and right here on this YouTube channel. You can check out my stream at twitch.tv/BonDiesel. And I am at BonDiesel on Twitter and like Instagram and a bunch of other places. That is all I have. So until next time.